She encourages them to go out and conquer the world because that's what men like to do. This is so tragically far removed from what our culture has done, turning men into irrelevant, unnecessary, toxic idiots. There is good and historical news. In a New York Times article this week, for the first time in modern American history, young men are now more religious than their female peers. They are attending church services more often, and they're more likely to identify as religious. These young men are looking for leadership. They're looking for clarity. They're looking for meaning. And they went on to say that these guys are just hungry. This is a massive opportunity that the church must grasp onto. Welcome to Morning Tea. Hello, I'm Joanne Jolee, and I'm so glad you're here today. There's been an erosion in our culture of the traditional male roles. There's been an all-out assault on masculinity. Modern feminism has devalued the traits that are most often associated with masculinity, like strength and power and leadership and provision. And this has certainly led men to feel disconnected from their God-given calling to protect and to lead and provide for their families. And add to that the deconstruction of the gender roles, which has really undermined the beauty of the complementary roles of men and women. And the lies on gender equality, these have pitted themselves against the biblical truth. And what's happened is that there's been a real shift that has contributed to a loss of clear identity and purpose for men. So the Gen Zers are the 12 to 27-year-olds, and a young man named Luke Simon, responded to the New York Times article, "Why Gen Z men like me are staying in church." And he says it's in that place that he can feel masculine. And he points out that since feminism and the Me Too movement emasculated men, he finds in the church a positive vision of manhood. At church, we're called to something higher. True masculinity is rooted in knowing who you are, your identity as a son of God, and in having a mission, a purpose worth giving your life to. It's about taking action and showing agency, knowing you have the power to make a difference in your life, your family, and your community. It's about leaning into a unique God-given responsibility, entrusted with power to protect, to care for, and defend the vulnerable. At church, Gen Z men are still being called to sacrifice in a culture that has taught them to live for themselves. And he cites John 15:13, "Greater love has no one than this, that a person will lay down his life for his friends." Today's gender-neutral, gender-fluid world has blurred the lines of God's creation of males and females as distinct expressions of humanity. It has questioned masculinity's value. Gen Z men like me long to hear that our God-given power has purpose, our responsibility has reward, and our valor has value. We crave the call to be humble sons, committed brothers, and wise fathers in our spiritual communities. And in a culture of confusion, the church has provided a clear and consistent vision of manhood shaped by the cross. Gen Z men like me don't need a new cultural definition of manhood. We need to be reminded of the one that's been true all along, the one many of us are finding at church. Wow, that's amazing. So what is it that these young men find when they come to church? Well, for one, it's community. And Luke goes on to talk about that when he says Gen Z men are still being called to community in a culture that taught them to do it on their own. The New York Times article also noted this, where they said the camaraderie was easy to see after the Sunday service. A circle of young men lingered in the sanctuary, talking and laughing and chatting with newcomers. There are so many genuinely good guys that are just literally always here for you. We do have big problems in our evangelical churches, as I've said many times, but I've spoken to the answer, and that's for believers to focus in on those weekly small group meetings, which is the model for success. And it's how the early church gathered for at least a couple of centuries. And this is exactly what the Gen Z men need. They need to experience real, intimate fellowship with peers and older men, and to be encouraged and edified. I've got 4 or 5 Gen Z grandchildren, and my oldest is 19. She has lamented to me the tragic utter wasting of so many male peers on the internet in places like OnlyFans, where they get lured in and they get trapped in the addiction. So here's a few comments from a couple of very popular YouTubers just discussing why this is terrible for society and the real sense of community that is missing for men.
I don't just send you a link to my OnlyFans, right, and ask you to subscribe, but that's how a generation of women have been trained by feminists to view men in order not to be oppressed by the patriarchy, right? And so these women, I think, have been essentially made unable to love men as people. Right? They don't really see them as people. They view them as a kind of competition, competitors on a playing field. And the young men don't know what to do. And so now they're just following their base instincts of, I should try and have sex. I should try and see a woman naked. And therefore that's flattening a woman down to merely her biological components. Now it's not even romance, it's not about falling in love. It's about send nudes. It's about hookups.
Well, it's objectification from men to women and commodification of men from women.
It's terrible for society in general. It's again, it's teaching women that men aren't important and unique things. If you go back 100 years, people were so much poorer, but they were not on antidepressants. They weren't all depressed. They weren't all sad because they had their families, they had their friends, they had their social lives. They had a reason to live. I've got to go over to Mavis's house and pick up her groceries for her, and stuff like this. And you feel good about doing something good for someone else. Mavis will probably make you a cup of tea when you get there, and you have a nice little chat and things like this. Like these relationships are the genuine, what makes life worth living. Ostracization used to be a punishment, and now people are literally just ostracized on their phones thinking, God, I hope Twitter gives me some likes today. From who? You don't know. You don't know any of these people, Like, if men don't kill themselves, they're exiting education and society and family life at the highest rates ever. Women are frantically pursuing careers only to discover that they're unable to find a partner that they're attracted to and then jump on meds at 40 years old. The highest percentage, the highest group that use meds are between white women between 40 and 45 years old. And then the people who want kids can't find a partner that does as well. Birth rates declining. Faith in the leaders and the news organizations non-existent. And everyone's just about sufficiently sedated not to notice or care that it's going on. That's a precise and accurate summary of how the West has declined and will collapse, yes.
Proverbs 31 focuses on the woman that we ought to admire, but there is in there a cameo of the man she's with. That man which makes up the model of a husband and wife team. And what we see in this man is a respectable man with a great reputation in the city. He says beautiful, lovely things about his woman. And with this kind of loving support, she can go as far as she likes. It's a real feminism there. And she does. She just takes the bull by the horns. Family first, and then business, and major investments follow along. These two have great respect for each other. They value each other. They see what each brings to this table of marriage, where there's no competition. There is only this unification, a multiplication of all the facets of their lives. This is so tragically far removed from what our culture has done, turning men into irrelevant, unnecessary, toxic idiots. Nope. This man, he trusts and appreciates and praises his wife without any hint of self-deprecation. And what does his wife do? She does him good. She inspires him all the days of her life. She encourages him to go out and conquer the world, because that's what men like to do. The article notes that the young Gen Z women are having a harder time right now. But as I spoke about in my last post, there is a revolution underway with the little bit older millennial women who figured out that feminism has tried to turn them into little men, and they're miserable and they've had enough of it. Both articles recognize that young women are still spiritual, they're still seeking, and a woman might say, I feel feminine when I lead with compassion, when I serve my community, or I build relationships that are rooted in faith. But back to our young Gen Z men who are learning the scriptural model of manhood, which they were created to aspire to. A truly fulfilling life that emphasizes their leadership and their strength and their service within the family and their church and community. It really centers on living according to God's design for men. And it has those core aspects like leadership and responsibility. This leadership is modeled after Christ. It's sacrificial, it's humble, it's servant-hearted, and men are seen as the spiritual heads of their households. They're responsible for guiding their families in their faith and ensuring their well-being. Men are called to work hard to provide for their families and to protect them both physically and spiritually. And this not just involves the material provision, but also nurturing, safe, loving, faithful home environment. And the Bible encourages men to be strong and to be courageous, not just physically, of course, but in their spiritual perseverance. They're urged to stand firm in their faith. They learn that Christ's example of manhood is not one of domination, but of service. So different. Men are called to lead by serving, putting the needs of their families and communities first, before their own. True biblical manhood embraces humility. It's knowing that leadership is about serving those around you. And the scriptures emphasize that men must live with integrity, maintaining faithfulness in all their relationships, particularly with their wives, of course, and for men to uphold truth and righteousness in all aspects of their life. So biblical masculinity is grounded in reflecting the character of Christ in leadership, in responsibility, and sacrificial love. And as the New York Times article notes, it is young men who now register higher in attachment to basic Christian beliefs, in church attendance, and in the frequency of Bible reading. Praise God, because we need this generation of young men to step boldly into their God-given manhood. Thanks so much for being here today. I look forward to your comments, and remember, look for the blessings because they're all around you. Bye-bye.